start. It's 7:05. We're very pleased to see another good audience here tonight. We've had to run for chairs. This is the third night in succession. I am the speaker tonight, and I'm also introducing myself. I didn't want to. Rather than write out everything for someone else to read, I'll just pull it out of my head. I know some of you won't know who I am, so those who know who I am can bear with me. My name is Doug Sobey. I'm the president of the Bedeque Area. Ooh, that's worrying. Oh, I think that's Bedeque Area Historical Society, and in terms of my education, I was born in Summerside, went to Summerside schools, and then to Mount Allison University. And when at Mount Allison, I applied for a Commonwealth scholarship to the United Kingdom, and I got a scholarship to Aberdeen University to study ecology. And I went over there, and I never came back, basically, in the sense that I've worked all my life in the UK and only come back in the summers. And my home is in Belfast, Northern Ireland, where I taught at a couple of universities, University of Ulster and Queen's University of Belfast. But for quite a few years, I've been coming back for longer periods in the summer since I've retired, and taken up an old interest that I had many years ago when I was a teenager, and that was the history of Prince Edward Island and also family history. And so I was asked to join the Bedeque Area Historical Society, and I've been a member since the beginning in 2010. So I welcome you all tonight. This is the third in a series of talks, and I see my screen hasn't come back there, so I'm just going to check that. There we are. There's a loose connection here, I think. That's the problem. But I'm going to speak tonight on a topic that, as you can see, Prince Edward Island and the Monarchy. And from 1765 to the present, I have, I suppose, from my school days, have had an interest in English history, British history as well, and of course Canadian history, and the relationship of British history and Canadian history, which are closely intertwined. So let's begin the talk. And we're going, oh yes, could you turn down the lights, please? Right here, no, oh, round. Sorry, I should have. Just one of the lights will switch off the yeah, that's great. In 2022, June 2022, Walter Clark of Kensington, some of you may know him, came into the museum and donated 11 portraits, frame portraits of members of the royal family. And I thought, well, they look very interesting. I'll show you them in a moment. But we also had, prior to that, this very large sort of domineering portrait of Queen Victoria, dating from her widowhood, which hung in the Cairns house in Wilmot. And Ruth Cairns said the children were always frightened of this ominous lady at the top of the stairs. And so she went into the storage up in the attic eventually, and they were downsizing and thought, poor Queen Victoria, who was not amused, is out of the house and into the museum. So we had those collections. The ones that, I'll show you the ones that Walter gave us were smaller, and some of them quite historic. That my computer is interfering here. Ready to update. That George III is a contemporary portrait, a small print of George III dating from, it seems to be 1804, and there's another portrait of George, his grandfather, George II. There was a portrait of the young Victoria and Albert. It's actually extracted from a newspaper, perhaps the Illustrated London News of the 1830s. There is Queen Victoria at her, I think it's her Golden Jubilee. This is a Canadian edition. You can see the maple leaves in the corner there, and the usual thistle rose shamrock along with the maple leaves. And in fact, most of these are Canadian made, including this. This is her son, Edward VII, in his coronation robes. It was produced in Montreal. And one that was very familiar to me because of my grandparents' house. Has anyone seen this picture before? It's Queen Alexandra, her grandchildren, and dogs. And when the auctioneer was valuing these portraits, he said, "Oh, I've seen more of those come in, for resale in an auction than any other royal portrait." And then there was a portrait, a coronation portrait of George V. Now, if these names are all unknown to you, by the end of the evening, you're going to be able to put them in place. But I'm sure you all have a basic knowledge of somewhat of this. And then the royal family of 1911, King George V, Queen Mary, and their children. And this also is a Canadian printed version. And this also, it doesn't come from Walter Clark, but is on loan, a calendar of King Edward VIII, who only ruled or was king for less than a year. And this is a Halifax calendar, and he did not see 1937 as king, and the calendar never got any use, and it was kept as a souvenir, and nothing moved on it because obviously it was sort of unique. And then this portrait, these are especially perhaps the most important ones in the collection that Walter gave us. They're paired photos, as it says, with autographs of the Earl and Countess of Athlone. Now, they were the Governor General of Canada. He was Governor General. She was Princess Alice of Albany, granddaughter of Queen Victoria. And they were, on the back of the frame is a sticker with the words, Mrs. B.W. LePage, Government House, Charlottetown, P.E.I. And Honorable Bradford LePage was Lieutenant Governor from 1939 to 1945. They visited. They must have given them these framed, signed photographs, and somewhere else they ended up in an auction and eventually came into the museum here. So they were once probably in Government House. So I thought, when are we going to ever be able to show all these? They'll go into our attic. But on the 8th of September 2022 came the sudden death of the Queen. And that sort of got me thinking, and also the funeral on the 19th of September, and the role which Canada played, and one very obvious role was in terms of leading the funeral procession. I thought, well, this may be an opportunity, and also the coronation coming up in May 23, to put on display these paintings and portraits and framed pictures. And thus was born the idea for an exhibit. And it's in the museum, and you can see it at any time. We were loaned, we didn't have much royal memorabilia, which is the collectibles of the last century and a half probably, but we were loaned these also by Walter Clark. And so we were able to set up the exhibit, which you can see parts of it there, with each of the pictures labeled and sort of put in a context in terms of who the person is and the significance of whether they're Canadian made or whatever. And also we these are just views of the exhibits and the contents of the exhibits. So I'm going to talk about these exhibits and their contents, and it will save you, it might prompt you to have a more detailed look at the exhibits. Now, I'm noticing 3 people standing, and
One chair here.
pardon? There's one chair right at the front, and there are more chairs that could be got from the museum. But I want to give some historical background, so it's going to be a little bit of a history lesson for you, because the subject of the talk is the connection of Prince Edward Island to the monarchy. British monarchy, it is. And so if you'll, some of you may already be familiar with some of these points, but I'm going to give the timeline to island independence. Now that may seem odd, but in the context of its, I'll explain later what I mean by independence. And we have to go right back to 1758. Prior to 1758, the Prince Edward Island, Ile Saint-Jean, was within the French colonial empire. And on the 17th of August, the French garrison at Port-la-Joie surrenders Ile Saint-Jean to the British forces that had taken Louisbourg on the 26th of July. And Ile Saint-Jean was a dependency of Louisbourg, and it thus surrendered on the 17th of August. And the surrender and the formal recognition of Britain's possession of the island at that time, and continuing right through for up to Confederation, was in 1763. And then the British government had to decide, what are we going to do to this new acquisition to the empire, and they simply annexed it to Nova Scotia by royal proclamation. So we became part of Nova Scotia. There was then, as part of Nova Scotia, they wanted to have it settled, and so Samuel Holland, a Dutchman, surveyor, I'll mention him later, completes a survey and map of Ile Saint-Jean with the intention of surveying what was present on the island and finding out how the island could be settled and making recommendations. And the whole island then, in 1767, was granted to about 100 proprietors in 10,000 or 20,000 acre parcels. This is sometimes called the Great Lottery of the land, but it meant that there was practically no crown land on the island whatsoever. It was now all in private ownership with stipulations, but I'm not going to go into those tonight. But some of the proprietors, 32 of them, petitioned the Crown for the separation of the island's government from Nova Scotia. And if we owe anything to the proprietors, this is perhaps their most significant contribution to island history. They asked the island to be separated, saying it was too far away in winter, the ice in winter, and so this was granted by the British government, and in 1769, on the 28th of June, and finalized on the 4th of August, the island is separated from Nova Scotia, and its first government is appointed. And that's the beginning of the island of St. John and Prince Edward Island as a separate colony and a separate province of Canada. That is the Great Seal of St. John's Island, and it's in Latin, it says the island of St. John in America, a seal of the island of St. John in America. That's a wax impression. That's seal was commandeered and taken by privateers or American looters in, I think it was 1775, and has never been seen again, the silver seal. So all we had is a wax impression. And then thereafter, the island is a separate political institution. The arrival of Governor Walter Patterson, so a government is established, arrived 30th of August 1770, and appointed an executive council shortly after. The first assembly, elected assembly, met in 1773 and continues. It's the House, the Legislative Assembly of the island actually descends from that first assembly in unbroken succession. And then in 1799, the island's name is changed from the island of St. John to Prince Edward Island. And this is just another example of the seal, which does survive, dating from 1815. And then in 1851, we have the beginning of what is called responsible government, cabinet government, with a premier and cabinet, this form of government that we have right up to the present time. So the first premier of Prince Edward Island was George Coles. And then in 1873, the island joins the Dominion of Canada as its seventh province. So it's in this sort of context that the monarchy is operating in the background. Just some idea of the population of the island at that time. From 1766, you can see in 1796 there are only about 4,000 people on the island, and it then rapidly rises, reaches a peak about in the 1880s, and then drops. And I remember when I was growing up, the population of Prince Edward Island was only 105,000 people, which was less than it was in the 1880s and 90s. But of course, what has happened since, there's been a slow and steady rise and a recent, very accelerated rise in population. So we're dealing with a very small population of, much of the island population during its the historical period is under 40 or 50,000, or even less than that. So, what's the timeline of the monarchy on Prince Edward Island? And I'll come back to that table. That shows the relationships between the monarchs who have ruled on Prince Edward Island and in British North America, and of course in the United Kingdom. And some of these you will know. I think perhaps you probably know them all. And perhaps one of the most significant, George III reigned for 60 years. And these, I'm showing them in at the time of their coronation, so they're quite young at the time. Succeeded by 60 years later by his son, the Prince Regent, who became George IV, and was fairly elderly at that stage and reigned only for 10 years. A very extravagant and wasteful, wasted the resources that his father had accumulated. Succeeded by his brother, William IV, who also elderly and reigned for only 7 years to 1837. And then we come to a monarch that everyone will know, who reigned for 64 years, Queen Victoria, and acquired a very large empire, or at least the British Empire expanded during her reign considerably. And she was succeeded by her son, Edward VII. We'll be coming back to him because he's quite important in the history of Prince Edward Island later. He's the first royal to visit Prince Edward Island. He was succeeded after 9 years by his son, George V, who reigned for 36 years, up to 1936, and was succeeded by his son, and he was saying he'll throw the whole thing away in a short time, and that's precisely what happened. Edward VIII reigned for less than a year and gave up the throne in order to be with Wallis Simpson and to marry her. So that left his very shy brother, King George VI, to succeed, and he is the father of the Queen. He died fairly young, in his 50s, I think. And is the sound okay? I feel my voice is not very high, but you're hearing with the speakers. Yeah, good. And he was, in 1952, succeeded by a monarch we all know and got so used to that we didn't think there would ever be any other, and for 70 years Queen Elizabeth reigned over the UK, Canada, and her other Commonwealth realms. And finally, just 2 years ago, Prince Charles became King Charles III, and he will not, of course, have such a long reign as his mother. You have young women who reign for 60 or 65 years, and their sons then have a short period of reigning. That shows the relationship going back to the, it's more or less just putting on a table what I've been telling you, but the ones that are in red have all visited Prince Edward Island in various capacities, and I'll talk about that later. The ones that in the early period did not. But we should note about the early period, in the first 143 years of the island under the British monarchy, it's dominated by the reigns of two monarchs. George III reigned for 60 years, and Queen Victoria reigned for almost 64. So that leaves only 17 years, compared with 143, 17 years for two others, the two sons of George III. And people got so very used to these long reigns that they continued to celebrate the birthday of George III, which was June the 4th, into the years of his successors in some places. And certainly Queen Victoria's birthday, which is the 24th of May, which is Victoria Day, well, you know, it's built around that, has continued as the sort of royal birthday ever since in Canada. Because people had got so used to it, and they thought, well, May holiday is very nice. And May and June are pretty close to each other in terms, because the King's birthday or the Queen's birthday was celebrated, as we shall see. Now, what I've just said, every monarch since Edward VII has visited Prince Edward Island, only two as reigning monarchs, and those two are George VI and Queen Elizabeth in those years shown there. Well, I'll come to look at the visits of these monarchs later, but before that, one connection between the island and the monarchy is in the names of the three counties. At least I'm going to start with that. Initially, the island was called the Island of St. John, which was or St. John's Island, which was a translation of Ile Saint Jean. And so we'll talk about that name later. But the three counties, how did the three counties acquire their names? Well, this is the man. It's the best picture we have of him. He's Captain Samuel Holland. He was a Dutchman. He spent most of his early years in Holland and Germany, and he took up a career in the British Army. He was a very skilled surveyor, and he was assigned the role in 1764 of the Surveyor General of the Northern District of America, which was Britain, having acquired all these new lands from France, needed someone to map them. And Captain Samuel Holland was appointed to this task. And he was told to begin with St. John's Island because it was considered very important for the fisheries resources. And so he did. And he produced a map of which this is a printed version, a small-scale printed version, and he produced the first accurate map of Prince Edward Island, which you can recognize it as and in fact it's very accurate in parts, there are errors in others. But he also undertook to name most of the, many names, 200 or 300 names, the coasts and bays and such. But he assigned the highest level of the royal family in 1765, when he applied the names, is exactly 4, or at least the nuclear family. There was the young king and queen, and 2 young boys, George and his brother Frederick. George is the older on the left there, Prince George. And Charlotte was to go on to have 13 other children. a total of 15 children. I think there were eight girls, no, the other way around, 8 boys and I think it's 5 girls and 10 boys, I'm not sure. I'm totally lost on the numbers, doesn't matter. And, but Holland, it's interesting that he assigned, he wasn't asked to do this. And he had only spent about 5 years in England. And how he decided to, apply the names. But he's given Charlotte the major role of what he considered to be the capital town, which he called Charlottetown, or that was the site. He was choosing the site of the town. And so the counties were named as shown, kings, prince, and queens, and we know them ever since. The capitals were chosen to correspond to those 3 members of the royal family, and he even chose the names of or assigned names to what were the parishes. Now we don't use those terms; they were civil parishes, so Georgetown is located in St. George's Parish, the patron saint of England. Charlottetown is in Charlotte Parish, and Princetown is in St. David's Parish. How do you explain that? What's St. David got to do with the Prince of Wales?
Well,
it's the patron saint of Wales. It's St. David. So Holland, it's all very logical. So the counties were named. Now I'll read this off. I don't expect you to read that, but all went well until in the late 1790s, the island government decided that they wanted to change the name of the island from St. John's Island. And what they said in the act is there was a problem with the mail, confusion with St. John's, Newfoundland, and St. John, New Brunswick, and the island of St. John. People were getting mixed up. Ships were going with the mail in various directions. And they did not propose Prince Edward Island. They proposed New Ireland as the name for Prince Edward Island. And, well, just think, if their proposal had gone through, we would be called New Ireland. British government refused that or objected to it and said that name is chosen for another colony elsewhere. But there is no other New Ireland elsewhere. And so the island government had to think again. And so what they did was choose Prince Edward Island. And the reason for this, and they state it right in the Act, is that I'm just reading, for prevention, where is it? The grateful remembrance of this island having been under the command of Lieutenant General His Royal Highness Prince Edward, Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's forces in the District of Nova Scotia. This was one of the sons of Edward III. We're now in 1798, and Prince Edward is the younger brother of Prince George and Prince Frederick, and he was based at Nova Scotia. He expressed an interest in Prince Edward Island, and so the government chose. I don't know how these things get chosen, but that's what happened, and so we've been called Prince Edward Island ever since. And this is the first map that shows the island with its name of Prince Edward Island. And it was actually published in 1798, the date is on it, even though the Act did not come into effect until 1799. And so from that day to this, we have been known as Prince Edward Island, and you say it without even thinking, what it means. But the one thing about the name Prince Edward Island that I find very sort of in terms of its visual appearance, it's three names, each with 5 letters, or is it 6 letters, and it's very balanced, Prince Edward Island. So, whereas New Ireland would be 2 words very unbalanced. Well, anyway, those of Irish descent can lament the fact that although Scots people would probably have contested the name, and there were more Scottish people in Prince Edward Island at the time. Also receiving notice that in the same year, 1799, they named the battery, which was then located at the bottom of Great George Street, the Prince Edward Battery. And I grew up calling it Fort Edward. In fact, the name was restored in just 2005. It was established on this site, as it says, this is the plaque on the site, Prince Edward Battery, in 1805. That's when it was established at that site there, moved from the lower part of Great George Street to where it is now. And so it's been, the name Prince Edward Battery has been restored as of 2005. The Charlottetown also, the governing Governor Patterson and Fanning and others were laying out and the Surveyor General Wright laying out Charlottetown. This is an early plan of about 1800. There are earlier plans than this, but they also, if we look at the names of the streets, which you probably know if you're familiar with Charlottetown, also honored the royal family in a similar way. And I hadn't realized that Queen Square was called after Queen Charlotte rather than Queen Victoria. I think I must have read somewhere where someone said it's after Queen Victoria, but in fact it was called Queen Square long before Queen Victoria was born. So it's named after Queen Charlotte, and the three streets presumably following the names of the island counties, or similar to the counties. I want to go on to, having looked at the principal names that I'm going to talk about tonight, look at royal visits. In preparing the exhibit in the museum, I decided to find out how many royal visits, and I'll enlarge this later. But this is a timeline running from 1860 to 2000, well, to the present day. And you can see there are 21 royal visits that over the years. And they go back to 1860, and the first of these is Prince Albert Edward. Prince Albert Edward, usually called Prince Albert or Bertie, was the first to arrive in 1860, and I'm going to come back to that because it was a very significant visit, and there's a lot of information on it. In the meantime, I'm going to, and I'll just read this out, so you don't have to read it, but I'll show you pictures. Those were early visits of Victoria. Those actually are all sons, children of Queen Victoria, 3 boys and a girl, plus a Prince George is the son of Albert Edward, so he's a grandson of Queen Victoria, and they're coming in the 1860s and 70s to Prince Edward Island. Not just to Prince Edward Island, by the way. They're touring, they're also visiting Canada and other parts. And I thought I'd look at these early visits and see what the nature of these visits. They were often during their military training, and these were just young boys. This is Prince Alfred, the second son of Queen Victoria. He was only 17 when he came to Charlottetown. He visited in 1861, and then in 1869, another brother, a younger brother, Prince Arthur, visited Charlottetown in 1869, and then comes the grandson, Prince George of Wales, who later became King George V. Again, military training, naval usually, visited Charlottetown while he was on HMS Canada, the ship HMS Canada, and then later her great-grandson, Prince Albert, in 1914, also training in the Navy, visited Charlottetown. But these were, as soon as they arrived, there was a great flurry in Charlottetown. They were known to be the children and grandchildren of Queen Victoria, so they were treated very formally, and I'm sure the poor boys didn't want any of this, but that's the way they were treated, and had to meet dignitaries and deliver speeches and such. Well, there's a picture that has survived of one of these that has remained on the island, and this is Prince George. You've just seen this picture there a moment ago. I don't know if you can pick him out. I'll pick him out for you. And the members of the Charlottetown Cricket Club in Victoria Park in June 1884. That is Prince George with a cigarette in his hand at the age of whatever. And I think he was a lifelong smoker. And that is him enlarged there. The daughter of Queen Victoria, who came to the island in 1879, was Princess Louise, but her husband, the Marquis of Lorne, John Campbell, was Governor General of Canada in those years, 78 to 83, and so this is part of a Canadian tour. And then Queen Victoria's granddaughter, I've already explained this picture, Princess Alice, came to Charlottetown during the war with her husband, who was the Governor General, the Earl of Athlone. So those were the early visits, but the most significant visit of all was the first, and I'm going back to look at that first visit. I skipped over it, and that's the visit of the Prince of Wales, Prince Albert Edward, to the island in August 1860. It was the first visit by a member of the royal family, and he was, at the age of 18, he came to visit the island. This is a photograph taken of him during the tour. It was part of the North American tour in the United States, as well as, but principally Canada, and then John down into the United States. I'll show you the route. And this was the equivalent of a visit of the royals, say William and Kate, to the United States or Canada, as they did in 2011. It was treated with, he was treated as a celebrity and very shy as well, I think. But his route, you'll notice he arrived in, and with military ships in St. John's, first of all, and then to Sydney, and then to Halifax, and then going through Nova Scotia and across to St. John and up to Fredericton, and then back to Nova Scotia through Truro, over to Pictou, and to Charlottetown, and then on to Quebec and Ontario, and then down into the States, and eventually he made his way back through New York. And the American press, the British press were following, and the American press as well. And the visit is well documented, and I'm going to just spend a little more time on it. As the first visit to the island by a member of the royal family and the heir of the throne to boot, the visit of Prince Albert was viewed as the social and ceremonial event of the decade, if not in retrospect the whole century. Because the prince was accompanied by the British and American press, the visit was well documented by press reports, photographs, and lithographs. Now, on the island, elaborate preparations were made, including the dispatching of a regiment from Halifax to provide appropriate military ceremony, the re-uniforming of the local militia, all got new uniforms, the re-shingling of Government House, and I'm sure the poor boy didn't notice any of this, as usual, and the building of 8 elaborate arches, and I'll show you some of this later, spanning Charlottetown streets. The town was overwhelmed by visitors, coming not only from all parts of the island, but also by steamer from the mainland. But as Harry Holman, the retired archivist, notes in his blog, Sail Street, quote, "Behind the well-ordered facade of triumphal arches and speeches by worthies, there was an undercurrent of chaos. The visit had completely overwhelmed the resources of the town. And unfortunately, it rained just as the prince landed and continued to pour in torrents all the rest of the day and night." And he only had 2 days on the island. It is almost very dead. Now, the New York Tribune reporter has been found by Harry Holman, and I'm going to quote from it. But I'll do that in a moment. The restless crowd also impressed the correspondent for the New York Tribune, not only for its size, but also for its behavior. He reported that strangers had been pouring into the little city of Charlottetown for a week before the prince's arrival, estimating that between 15 and 20,000 visitors were present. There was no accommodation for anyone. They were sleeping almost outside, and it was raining, I suppose. He was able to contrast the behavior of the crowd with that of New York, with which he was more familiar, and not to the credit of Charlottetown. So this was from the New York Tribune. Here in Charlottetown, nothing has been known in street or square but incessant, brutal bursts of drunkenness, so violent and wild and reckless that the most vicious quarters of New York could not yield the parallel. I never saw so small a place given over so utterly to bestiality. Fancy a town in every street of which great riotous mobs continually gather in quarrelsome force, breaking through tavern doors, entrenching themselves in narrow lanes, and inviting gladiatorial combats with all who pass, or scattering about to spread disorder more effectually. Fancy a town in which every corner was made a fighting ground, in which deserting soldiers, of whom there were numbers, perpetually plunged into conflicts with the townspeople, and made free with their weapons until dragged away to temporary confinement. Fancy a town in which children, and plenty of them, of tender years, ranged the thoroughfares, not less besotted than the mature multitudes. The whole passing from hour to hour an uninterrupted scene of disgrace and degradation. There must have been something weak, he's continuing, there must be something weak in the administration of affairs. Of course, he adds, the better part of Charlottetown looked aghast upon these exercises, but that no provision should have been made for their suppression was surely the gravest oversight. So that's from the New York Tribune. Strangely, as Harry Holman notes, the deficiencies in civil order were not reported in the local papers, which instead focused on the turnout of the militia and the beauty of the street decorations. To read in the Islander or the Examiner, two local papers, of the events is not unlike encountering a parallel universe. The grand success of the visit, as reported locally, is also at odds with the scene sketched by the New York Herald reporter. This was another reporter from New York in a different paper. The cheering was not very energetic, and the weather was gloomy and wet. It cleared up during the time between his leaving the ship and reaching Government House, but after that it rained heavily all day. The illuminations, which were attempted in the evening, did, considering the extremely wet and cloudy weather, much credit to the natives. The attempt was spirited, but the failure desperate. So the New Yorkers didn't take much to Charlottetown. However, the British press, overlooking such behavior, judged the visitor's success, including the turnout of the militia, saying, His Royal Highness reviewed the volunteers, who, though far from numerous, were, in all relating to equipment and discipline, a credit to the colony. So, who do you believe? The tabloids of New York, or the British press, or the local papers? Just some of the images which survived from that visit. This is the fleet. There were a lot of, not just reporters, but etchers and people drawing following the prince. And this is a view of Charlottetown Harbour with the largest number of warships. There were 5 men of war in the harbour, and here is the flagship that was carrying the prince himself, the hero, in Charlottetown. I don't think this view is in Charlottetown Harbour, but the vessel was in Charlottetown Harbour. Here is one of the arches. Rich Porter has, on his blog site, has this. This is a photograph from the archives in Charlottetown showing, and these were very common to have these welcoming arches, and you can see two. There's one further up the street, and this is Queen Street, I think, up which the prince's entourage would be going. And there's the further arch. So they had a number of these in the city. And across the, some poet of island status had, in the ball that was held for the prince, they had this banner, "Thy grandsire's name distinguishes this isle. We love thy mother's sway and court her smile." The grandsire is the Prince Edward that we were, who was the father, I didn't mention, of Queen Victoria. So his grandson, another Prince Albert Edward, was visiting 60 years later. And this is the view, the lithograph of the Colonial Building, now Province House, the large crowds, the bleachers, the actual ceremony is going on, petition, presentations to, I guess my thing has given, oh no, there it is, to the prince who's standing on the steps. And the Mi'kmaq were part of the activity as well and had a ceremonial wigwam present and large crowds of these. As we've seen, you know, there were 20,000 extra people from all parts of the island and elsewhere. And here's another view. These views have become important because some of these, this is the gatehouse of Government House, and here is the princely going across the bridge, the government pond, and military here, and people cheering, and there's Government House in the background. And there's Government House with the gatehouse, and the battery, Fort Prince Edward Battery would be around on the other side there. Photographs were also taken. This is a photograph of the royal party, looking at it more closely in front of Government House. The prince is there in what must be a red uniform, and with the governor and Mrs. George Dundas, and they're posing for a photograph. Well, it was only 2 days. He spent only 2 nights on the island, but it did leave a legacy, apart from the stories and the reputation of the island torn to shreds in the New York papers. It did leave a legacy, more than that, and a legacy that lasted until at least 1969, and that is Prince of Wales College. And it was while he was here, and as a result of the visit, the government was planning a college at that stage, converting, this was the Central Academy, it dates from 1835, and they were converting it to a higher level of education, and they just asked the prince, can we call it Prince of Wales College? And he agreed, and also he allowed his motto, Ich dien, which is German for I serve, to be used. And so you can see the Prince of Wales feathers were added to the building, and this is about 1890, and that's the beginning of Prince of Wales College. And it continued up to, this is the third Prince of Wales College building, opened in 1933 after the second stone building burned, but above the main doorway you still see the that's the stone sculpture, the Prince of Wales motto of the 3 ostrich feathers, and Ich dien. And Prince of Wales, Holland College has revived the name just recently in 2014, and now calls this the Prince of Wales campus. Was visited by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, May 20th, 2014. So the name has been revived again. So that was one legacy that survived up until 1969 as a reminder of the Prince's visit. But there's another one that is even more solid and still survives, and that is a view from the 1860s, you'll know it, from Grafton Street, looking at the south side of Province House, the Colonial Building, and you'll notice this cannon. Have you ever noticed that before?
Yeah.
In Charlottetown? That cannon dates from his visit. Theophilus de Breezy, it's still there. This is the street today, and the cannon, you can't see it in that, it's actually right there in the, but I've got a better view of it here. And what happened was, this was a cannon at the fortifications near the coast, of Charlottetown, near the shore, had fallen into a ditch and water and had been abandoned. And so Theophilus de Breezy, who operated this apothecary shop behind, retrieved it and erected it vertically in the what was the soil of Charlottetown. And a flagstaff was run up it, a very large flagstaff, which was part of the activities associated with the visit of the Prince of Wales. And so it's persisted to this day. And the third legacy is the naming of Alberton, which after the Prince's visit, it had formerly been known as Caskenpeck, and they decided they were going to call it, after Prince Albert, Alberton. In the 1860s, for the first time, islanders began to carry about images of the monarch in the form of at least local currency. Now, they would have had before that British currency, possibly Canadian and Nova Scotian. But the islanders could view a flatteringly young image of Queen Victoria on the island's coinage and postage, and of course on those of the Dominion after the island joined Canada in 1873. These reflect on the left side, you'll notice they're in pence, the stamps, whereas they are in cents, and that was because of the adoption of decimalization. Canada had decimalized earlier. We were still not part of Canada, and so we decided we would decimalize at the same value as the Canadian coinage. So islanders at that time had their own independent colony under direct control from Britain rather than through Canada. We had our own postage and coinage. This particular book, historical sketch of especially Prince Edward Island, military and civil, by James B. Pollard, is sort of a chronicle of events of the previous century. He was a military man involved in the militia. He chronicles in considerable detail what he describes as the military and civil events in the history of the colony. And so it's like reading annals. You read what happened each year. The annual marking of the monarch's birthday and the anniversary of the coronation and the military events involved in it. And all the visits of members of the royal family are noted, and sometimes in great detail what ceremonial took place. And they become especially detailed from the 1850s when Major Pollard himself was an officer in the militia. But he also searched the papers, and I'll just show you one example. The birthday of George IV, 23rd April 1826. The celebration of His Majesty's birthday took place on that day. Military review being held on Queen Square. The administrator, Mr. Wright, being the inspecting officer. The governor was not present, but Mr. Wright. At 12 o'clock, the usual salute and firing of small arms took place. Then a marching past His Honour and cheering for the King ended the review, while a levee was held by the administrator at the governor's late quarters in the evening. So these would be annual events on the time of the King's birthday and later the Queen's birthday and the anniversary of the coronation. But here's one that comes from a different source, the Journal of Benjamin Chappell. And Benjamin Chappell was the Charlottetown's postmaster. He arrived in 1774 on Prince Edward Island in London, and he kept a day book in which he recorded his work. activities, but he recorded much else as well. So 4th of June 1814, Saturday, King's birthday, 700 men in town, and supposed 500 women. So it sounds like the men were counted and the women were estimated, or anyway, there's supposed 500. Perhaps he doesn't really believe it was 500 women. But you can imagine if the drinking activity associated with this festival time of partying, you know, it was a holiday, basically, and we're getting drunk, I suppose, when there were practically no controls on the use of alcohol. Whereas Mr. Pollard is much more sedate in his descriptions. 24th of May, 1838. The 24th being the anniversary of Queen Victoria's birthday was observed with great demonstration of respect and loyalty. The shipping in the harbour displayed their colours, while occasional puffs of curling smoke denoted heavy explosions of gunpowder. But the main attraction was centred in the garrison parade, where the Highland soldiers, dressed in their native garb, underwent inspection and review. And so on. He has many of these. In the same year, her coronation day was the grandest demonstration Charlottetown had yet witnessed. And he would have got these from the newspapers. And the auspicious event was celebrated with great enthusiasm. Early in the morning, the doors of the jail were thrown open. The prisoners were liberated, and the building surmounted with flagpoles covered with bunting. Arches were erected in the most public places and adorned with banners and mottos. So it was quite a celebration. In 1897, and I'm not going to describe these in any detail, he says, Charlottetown's celebration of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee was without exception the greatest event that ever took place in this city, and we doubt that it was excelled by any city of similar size and population owing allegiance to Her Majesty. And there's a long description of all of the activities associated with it. I'm going to move on in terms of the royal visits and just a very few, cover a few. But one I want to look at is the 1919. The dashing Prince Edward, Prince of Wales, spent all of 6 hours on the island on the 19th of August 1919 during his 2-month Canada-wide tour. He arrived by naval vessel at 11:30 a.m. and departed in the late afternoon after reviewing a veterans parade and attending a garden party at Brighton Villa, and also attending the races at the driving park. This is a picture of him from 1919. And here's some actual footage of the Prince being greeted by the Lieutenant Governor and Premier. Comes from a movie footage, British Pathé movie. And inspecting the veterans of the First World War as part of his activity during the day. Greeting or meeting the Mi'kmaq, at least 3 there, possibly 4 Mi'kmaq shown in the photograph, being greeted and having a chat with the Prince. Going to a fox ranch. How he got all this in within 6 hours. And you can see the foxes at the top there in the pens. So it was in the heyday of the island fox industry, and we were excelling the world, so that was where to take the Prince. And then he went off too, in those 6 hours, to the driving park, or the where it was. This comes from there was a book published on his travels. While he was on the race course, one of the stands took fire, and there was the beginning of a panic. Men and women starting to clamber wildly out of it and dropping from its sides. The Prince, however, kept his place and continued to watch the races. His presence on the stand quieted the nervous and checked what might have been an ugly rush, while the fire was very quickly got under. So that was the highlight of the day. That's the only story that enters the full book of his travels in Canada. The 2 months is the fire, the driving part. His brother, then, of course, he abdicated, became king only for a year. But another very big occasion was the visit of King George VI and Queen Elizabeth on the 14th of June, 1939. It was the first by a reigning monarch. And I'm just going to quote, as in the display, Ed MacDonald's book, If You're Strong-Hearted. 14th of June. For the first time in the island's history, a reigning British monarch paid an official visit to the province. It was an epochal event, and massive preparations were made for it. 5 special trains converged on Charlottetown on the morning of June 14th. 35,000 people, 3 times the city's normal population, lined the motorcade route in a drenching rain. Not good weather records for these visits. Hoping for a glimpse of the royal party. Ornate welcome arches marked the passage from Province House to Government House. In a few wet hours, it was all over, and Canada's King and Queen had sailed off for another rendezvous with other loyal subjects. I've looked at the official, this is the Guardian, and the Guardian ran editions, and we have at the front things that people have, copies that people have donated to the museum. For a week or two, the whole Guardian was covering both before the visit and after, but they arrived at 11 on their vessel at the wharf, and they left at 4. So, royal visits are not so short, I don't think, nowadays. But we were just given a very little of the time. But one legacy of it was Eaton's catalogue offered a mail-order picture distributed free to all anyone who wanted it. This colored picture of the King and Queen. And I remember sleeping under that picture at my grandmother's house in her bedroom. She had that picture of the King and Queen framed above her bed. And I don't know, does anyone else remember seeing that picture? Then the royal visits with the Queen, the recent Queen, made, as you see, and the Queen Mother, 4 visits to Prince Edward Island. And I'm just going to show from these are from the government, the PEI government website at the moment, historical PEI royal visits. This is a 1951 visit showing the Queen is there, I think, walking. And so that's a view. I'm not sure where it is. They don't give details. This is 1959, her visit, and also 1959. And then 1964, the opening of Confederation Center. I remember this visit. I wasn't at that event. I was a schoolboy, but I remember the opening of Confederation Center. And so these has something to do with the activities. Perhaps she was seeing an event at the time. And more recently, then her children and grandchildren have visited. And the 2 most recent visits are 2011, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. It was largely an informal affair, with the royal couple taking part in a dragon boat race in Charlottetown Harbour, William practicing his helicopter skills at Dalby, though a carriage was imported to add dignity to a ride down Great George Street. And I see Robert Gibbs managed to get a seat in the in the carriage. Rather than the Lieutenant Governor, the order of precedence would, anyway. And then they met the Mi'kmaq of the island, the dragon boat race, which is a traditional island sport which we've been practicing since the 1860s. Joke. I don't know what dragon. It's a new sport, I think. And this is also a picture from it. And him practicing his helicopter activities at Dalby and interacting with numerous, this is just an example, I think this is at Holland College, possibly the culinary class. There's Robert Gibbs again, I see.
Also at Dalby.
Was he? Oh.
And it rained.
Oh, yeah. And here they meet the fathers and mothers of Confederation. So, and finally, the most recent visit, and I was here that summer, but I didn't partake in it at all, was Prince Charles and Camilla in 2014 to mark the 150th anniversary of the Charlottetown Conference, and they were greeted by a well-known islander there, and they also took part in a Mi'kmaq smudging ceremony, and they attended a youth parliament, and they, is Robert? And then they, oh yeah, there he is again. The Holland College. This is decided that they're deceptive in this. This is the unveiling of the plaque, which renames the Holland College Prince of Wales campus, but it says visited by, but this is not the Prince of Wales campus, it's the new campus, so presumably he did not visit actually, but he did see the sign. And then he attended the opening of a trail, the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall trail system at Bonshire, isn't it, in that general area. And then there was a big concert at the end, and there was an audience, a very large audience, but also those are the dignitaries, and Gail Shea gets one side and Robert gets the other. And the poor lieutenant, well, I shouldn't say it, the poor lieutenant governor and his wife are left on the side. And then finally, there was a general illumination to close off the evening. And I'm sure this is what Charlottetown probably would have looked like in the 19th century. They would have illuminations to celebrate visits by the royal family, but also holidays and festivities. And that's quite a good picture of Great George Street lit up as if it was in the old times. So that brings us right up to the very last royal visit, and it brings me to the end of my talk, and I want to credit especially for the Prince of Wales visit in 1860, Harry Holman's blog, Sales Street, and Rich Porter's PEI Heritage blog. And if you want more information, go to both of those sites, because they covered it in much more detail, that royal visit. So thank you very much.
Well done, Mr.
I will answer questions if you have any.
I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned about all the St. John's around. You
Yes.
know the reason for that, do you?
It's even a bit of a mystery why Ile St. John, we were called that, and it's usually given. It usually appears on a map, an early map, and we don't know who was the first to apply that name.
Well, I understand that June 24th is St. John's Day.
Yeah.
And by the time you leave Europe to get to Prince Edward Island, that's about the time you would land.
It could be that they would arrive on that, especially St. John's, Newfoundland, because that was a much
And the
more
St. John
active-
River and...
Yeah, St. John River. He may have been a favorite, well, I'll say saint of the French, and he certainly is. It's St. John Baptiste, isn't it? St. John the Baptist and the other St. John's. No, I can't answer that question, but it's an interesting one. Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. The photo of Prince of Wales in his visit was taken by Matthew Brady,
Yes.
and he's, for those of you that don't realize, he's one of the most famous American Civil War photographers. So a lot of the photographs you see of the Civil War are Matthew Brady photographs.
I see.
So it's
Yeah.
kind of neat that.
And the Civil War would have followed this visit, he wouldn't have
Yes.
taken on that
Yeah,
career,
so
but it was
that's
after that.
Brady
yeah.
before he's become famous.
Yes,
Yeah.
I see, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and secondly, just New Ireland, there really was a New Ireland in the works.
Yes,
When
where was it, do you know? where
Yeah, it was
Mike?
the coast of Maine,
Oh, was it?
and Samuel Holland was involved.
I see, yeah. And so it's scuttled New Ireland here then, together. Yes.
Charlottetown, when did it come together? Not Charlottetown town.
Yeah. On Holland's map, I believe they're separate, but I don't know when. And sometimes you even get Prince Edward's Isle, or Island, Prince Edward's Island, rather than Prince Edward. But it definitely was Prince Edward's. The Charlottetown, I don't know when it, but certainly, I think in the early 19th century, they had joined into one.
Would it have to take an act of government to do it?
No.
No,
I
it was
think-
just mapping?
Yeah, I think it was just usage, what people used. Princetown never separated, I think. It was always, well, no, it was separate at first, also Princetown, and then joined as well, and Georgetown. Any other?
Why is there no S on Prince?
Well, Samuel Holland did not put an S on the map, on the name on the map. It was Prince County.
A king and queen.
I know. You could have called it King County and Queen County. Well, it doesn't sound very good, does it? King County, Queen County. Whereas Prince's County is 2 syllables and sort of a little bit harder to say. Yeah.
Just wanted to make a comment. There was one of the royal visits came through Bedeque. They had a motorcade, came through Bedeque. Did you know about that?
No, I didn't.
Well, my cousin Carmen Johnson told me this years ago. My grandfather used to live right here. There used to be a house there, and he had a machine shop out behind. He was a mechanic. So he was out in the machine shop, and he was one of these farmer types, He wasn't going to even go watch the Queen Mother when she came through. So somebody convinced him to go out to the side of the street. So when the motorcade was coming by his house, it stopped, and the Queen Mother pointed at him and said, "Come here." And she handed him a white rose. And she said, "You're a hard-working man. You deserve this." And that's apparently a true story.
And,
It happened right here in Bedeque.
well, she was here in 1967.
No, it was in the 50s. It might have been because my grandfather died in the early 60s, so it was in the 50s. I don't know the exact date,
Yes, I see.
but I heard this from, and I've headed, somebody here must remember the motorcade coming through Bedeque. Or do you? Maybe it was before.
It's not in the annals anyway. The Queen Mother in 1939, and then in 1960.
Well, it's in my family.
Yeah.
That definitely came through Bedeque.
You should look,
Yeah.
find out when that was.
Was it the Queen that they had to build a little toilet for her when she came to Wellington area in the French region?
I don't know. I really don't know.
There is a story with that. She never did need one, but they had to have one.
One for her alone.
Yeah.
Well, you know what would happen on the island if the Queen had used a toilet. Someone would take the seat and say, "The Queen sat on this
Yeah, there is
toilet."
something, there is a
Well,
story
there is,
around
yeah.
the French.
Yeah.
Well, you must have heard of the throne.
I had a friend, and still do, but she had a cottage in Spearman's Point, and her name, the stairs that she had down to, down the bank, she could swear that absolutely the Queen had walked down those steps, because they had, I don't know if any of you remember the '64 visit of Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. They had the Royal Yacht Britannia in Summerside Harbour, and it was a time of the separatism in Quebec, the FLQ, threats of violence and to kill the Queen. So she flew into the airbase at Summerside, and it was October. I think we were at school, but all the school kids, high school it was, we were let out. We knew which street, Central Street in Summerside. But that motorcade flew down the street so fast, it was all cleared, that we couldn't even see anything of who was in what car. And there were complaints in the press the next day that, is this the way it's going to be treated? And then what she did was they took the Queen and Prince Philip to the Marine Wharf, and they had these special steps to get down to the launch, which took them out. So those steps were at Spearman's Point for quite a number of years. They then went to Charlottetown, and they did slow it down then, probably with bulletproof cars and such. And the visit was a few days, and then on to Quebec as well. How many have been to or remember a royal visit that you've actually seen, the royalty, whoever?
Oh, no.
Oh,
Lady
quite-
Diana and Prince Charles were a government house one time, so we
Yeah.